It's time to wake the old ones. It's time the stars are right. It's time to Call of Cthulhu on the Lovecraft Show tonight. I'll post the rest of the song in the video description below, but it's Mr. Welch, and we are talking about Call of Cthulhu, the definitive horror RPG and considered by several to be the greatest RPG of all time. For the few of you I assume are not familiar with the Cthulhu Mythos, this was the damaged brainchild of horror writer H.P. Lovecraft, who back in the early 1900s put out some really creepy stuff. Lovecraft in his time managed to take the horror genre, which was just beginning to form, and hammer it into a cohesive form with slimy tentacle monsters, dark secrets that cannot be known, and generally heroes that went insane and died a lot. Lovecraft today is a bit controversial in some small circles because of his opinions toward anyone that wasn't him. But Lovecraft wasn't racist in the fact that he hated black people. He was afraid of everyone. I mean, he was clinically phobic. Listing his phobias would take up the entire time of this video, but let's just say he was physically afraid of anyone who wasn't white, anyone who didn't live on the East Coast, anyone who lived south of the Mason-Dixon line, anyone not from New England, anyone who didn't speak English, and anyone who came here as a migrant. And not phobic like rampant hatred of them, I mean phobic as in curled into a ball and sucking his thumb when introduced to one of the sources of his phobias. The guy didn't have issues, the guy had volumes. Now, that turned out to be good for us because his numerous mental issues personified themselves in his rather well-known and well-written books. Lovecraft's writings centered on isolation, finding out things that man was not meant to know, and in general, horrors from beyond that were beyond comprehension. Lovecraft didn't write happy stories. The survival rate of his protagonists hovered right around 0%. It is said that to read H.P. Lovecraft you need two things, a nightlight and a dictionary, because he used a lot of big words and he could turn that prose into something that could keep you awake. Lovecraft didn't live too long. He died in his 40s of cancer, but that didn't kill his literary universes. Other authors were more than happy to pick up the pen where he left off. So you have authors like Ashton Clark Smith or Robert W. Chambers who started adding to his universe. Then in 1981, Sandy Peterson made role-playing game history when he wrote Call of Cthulhu the RPG, which was radically different from the other RPGs at the time, because unlike Dungeons & Dragons and the others where you start off weak and eventually become a demigod yourself, no matter how good you get in Call of Cthulhu, no matter how many times you raise your stats, the most basic monsters will rip you in two. The old joke about Call of Cthulhu is the most important stat is movement. So instead of playing adventurers, you're playing investigators, and you are sorely outmatched. Fortunately, most of the bad guys are human cultists, which are more along your speed, because if you run into some of the nastier stuff, like, I don't know, Hounds of Tindalos or Star Vampires, they will TPK the party in no time flat. And one of the major parts of the game is sanity loss, which is kind of eked into other games. When people do something stupid, they get told to lose sanity points, where the human mind just isn't capable of understanding how the universe truly is, with sleeping gods that are going to destroy the universe when they wake up, and these insane people that are trying for some reason to wake the gods, and you've got to stop them from doing that. And the first time you run into, say, a Night Gaunt or a Migo, your sanity is going to take a hit. Then you've got the infamous skill Mythos lore, which is a true understanding of how the universe actually works. Unfortunately, Mythos lore and sanity run counter to each other, so for every point of Mythos lore you gain, your permanent sanity drops a point, which causes an issue because the people who know how to put Nyarlathotep or Hastur back in their boxes are usually a few points away from stark raving insanity, and when your insanity hits 0, your character's done because you are permanently insane. To say the game is lethal is an understatement. You do not have a lot of hit points, you do not do a lot of damage. The same cannot be said for a lot of the monsters, and some of the monsters you just cannot kill. Now, there's ways to get rid of monsters, and those usually involve magic, and unfortunately magic causes sanity loss when you use it, so there's a problem there. Again, to get rid of the monster, you have to sacrifice your brain. The mechanics are fairly simple. It's a percentile-based system, so you have like a 56% chance of doing something, or a 78% chance of doing something else. When you get a skill, you start off with a multiplier, so if you have a multiplier of 3 and an intelligence of 10, and you buy that skill, your base skill starts at 30%. It's a hit point system, but hit points usually don't mean much because you don't start with many. You rarely get any more, and most of the monsters can one-shot you anyways. Some of the monsters are so powerful that any hit will kill you no matter how many hit points you have, so you gotta watch out for them. So it's very much a mystery role-playing game as you go into the various towns, try to solve the problem. Usually it's cultists, so you have to take care of them through violence or trickery or something similar. Some of the monsters are low-powered enough that you can take down by yourself. For example, ghouls are tough, but they're not invulnerable. And a lot of the other stuff, you basically have to just run as fast as you can when you find out what's doing it. And then you get to go ride the sanity roller coaster, because discovering monsters usually costs you sanity, and defeating them gives you sanity. Fortunately, beating them gives you more sanity than you lose for usually seeing them. But not always. The big bads can cause massive amounts of sanity loss. The great old ones, if you see one and pass a sanity check, you lose 1d20 sanity. If you fail it, you lose 1d100. Since you only can ever have 100 points of sanity maximum, there's a chance that just seeing Cthulhu will drive you absolutely insane. Because you're so mismatched in the power level between the NPCs and the monsters and yourself, most of the adventures are you trying to nip the various evil plots in the bud before they can get implemented. If you somehow come out of the adventure with more sanity than you went into it with, congratulations, you have done very well. But most adventures, it's a very slippery slope into madness, as you will run across more bad guys or see more horrors that will eat away at your sanity until you finally hit zero, or you'll lose enough sanity in one large chunk from seeing something to drive you pretty insane, and then you have to retire the character and get institutionalized. Call of Cthulhu is not a game for people who like happy endings. A large reason for the popularity of Call of Cthulhu is it fits in well with just about any time setting, and they have books for just about every time setting. The stock setting is the 1920s, but if you want to play in 1890s Edwardian England, they've got a book for that. Ancient Rome, they've got a book for that. Modern day, of course. You've got source books for the Vietnam War, the distant future, medieval times. If there's a time period that you want to fight undead horrors trying to force themselves into the world, Call of Cthulhu has a book for that. And because the game is so setting fluid, if you want to recreate famous events and put a Call of Cthulhu twist to them, go ahead. I have played Call of Cthulhu that were set on the Titanic. If you want to recreate, say, the TV show The Terror, where you are explorers trapped in the pack ice with an unspeakable and unstoppable horror picking you off one at a time, go for it. Now, if you want to try to power game this and run around smiting Cthulhu's minions for good and defeating everyone, you're going to have a really bad time, because that's a quick way to get smeared all over the walls. The game requires a modicum of intelligence, because you are investigators. You're going to have to figure things out on your own and figure out how things tie together so you can stop the plot. And there are moments in almost every adventure where you need to learn quickly that it's time to run, because you are facing things that you cannot even begin to touch. It's not a race to zero sanity unless you are really stupid. Call of Cthulhu has been in print since 1981. It has 6 versions. It has been licensed to numerous other game companies. It has a tremendous and innumerable number of spin-off products. Any local game store worth its salt will have a copy of the latest book, and finding the older books isn't hard. Some of the first edition stuff, however, is super expensive, very high quality, but not very numerous, so you're going to have to shell out some bucks for those. But unlike other game systems, Chaosium will continuously reprint the more classic modules in each edition. So if you want to play Mask of Nyarlathotep, which is considered one of the greatest modules ever for any role-playing game, there's multiple versions of Mask of Nyarlathotep where they update it for each edition. You can get the older stuff, at least 3rd edition and onwards, for not very much. Sometimes you can get it for list price. It's not a scavenger hunt like you would trying to find older D&D. There is a collector's market for the really old stuff, but those people are buying to collect, not to play, because a lot of the mechanics in there has been subsumed into later editions, and some of the supplements have been merged into the books themselves. The early edition is notable for having that really creepy pointillism art with all the monsters, which really set D&D aside from the line art of the other RPGs of its day. Unfortunately, I don't remember the artist's name, and I do know that he died extremely young. If you wanted to turn this into something that's Mythos light and go with more pulp adventure, because it is the 1920s, this is the time where Indiana Jones was supposed to be taking place. Knock yourself out. The mechanics can pull it off. The background setting for that time period is just staggeringly well, though again it is tinged through the everything's partly a horror story. The combat rules are a little bit grindy because guns don't do that much damage, and you do have a fair amount of hit points. So shooting someone with a 38, you have to shoot them several times before they die. So it's not insta-death for human versus human combat, usually. Speaking of the background, the number of different settings and the ambiances they throw together, you can create the entire Cthulhu world of 1920 just using all the source material because there's just so much of it. Cthulhu has the advantage of there's not much of a metaplot. It's based on real-world history, so in order to get more information on later events, you just have to wait for somebody to write an event for, say, Cthulhu 2008. The 1920s are always the 1920s. That never changes. So you've got a huge historical tie-in. If you want to stop evil Ku Klux Klan cultists from summoning Hastur, and you want to grab Agatha Christie and Eddie Rickenbacker, knock yourself out. Because the Lovecraftian mythos has been added to by so many different horror writers, hell, even Stephen King added to it at some point, there are so many different bad guys, and they are found in unique locations. So if you wanted to go after the Wendigo god Ithaqua, you're going to have to go to the Pacific Northwest. Nyarlathotep is normally found in Egypt because he's associated with the pharaohs. Dagon is hidden in the creepy small fishing towns around New England. Then you've got the ability to go to new worlds, and most of the worlds are generally hostile to life, so that's a quick way to get a TPK. But just about anywhere you would go that you would think of that has a sense of adventure, there's going to be some mythos monster set in that area. One of the most famous adventures is Beyond the Mountains of Madness, which is a continuation of The Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, and that's a big box set all set up in the Arctic where you are 1920s Arctic adventurers, and you have to find out what the evil bad guys are and what the hell is going on with all these giant albino penguins and all these other things that man was not meant to know. It's this massive epic quest that I found a little tedious at times because at the very beginning it's pretty much just a scavenger hunt and a search and pack, but you stumble into this mystery and then you try to complete the original mission's quest, and that one almost always ends in a TPK, because if the Shoggoths don't eat you and the Elder Spawn don't kill you, then you're probably going to go insane at some point. It's a really difficult module. If you actually get to see an old one, that's usually done for horror value, because you can't kill the old ones. They specifically cannot die. If you somehow get them down to 0 hit points, you're cheating, but you're also only temporarily inconveniencing them because they will reform and come after you. You're not supposed to fight the great old ones. They shouldn't even be given stats. They just, if they hit you, you die. Cthulhu is so lethal that he doesn't even roll to hit. He rolls a d6, and that's how many people he eats a turn. Considering the sanity loss for seeing Cthulhu, if you blow your roll is 1d100, you're probably already insane and you're going to die anyways. There are some good guys, if you can call them that, in Call of Cthulhu, at least for the super powerful ones. There's Nodens, there's Bast, there's Morpheus, but even those guys really don't like to get involved with mortal society, and their help can usually be as lethal as the thing that they're saving you from. Teleporting you away from the sands of Egypt, where a killer sandstorm is about to eat you because Nodin's feeling generous, but unfortunately he puts you at the top of Everest. Yes, you're safe from Nyarlathotep, and guess what? You're going to die in a few rounds from exposure anyways. Not saying Call of Cthulhu is impossible, I'm just saying don't get too attached to your player character. So that's Call of Cthulhu. It is a horror module where you are never going to get as good as the monsters, so you're going to have to play smart. You're not going to be able to hack your way through it. You're going to have to figure out what the cause is and figure out how to stop it without actually getting into combat with it 99% of the time. If you like mysteries and you like horror, this is the game for you. And like I said, because it's so different and unique from other settings and so well written, this game has consistently won awards for best role-playing game. It has topped the various talking head lists on which is the greatest role-playing game of all times more times than just about anything else. You're trying to save the world from a reality that it's not ready to face yet, and unfortunately the only way to do that too often is to sacrifice your own sanity to keep the rest of the world safe. This is a game for thinkers. This is not a game for min-maxing. It's not possible to min-max because even if you somehow roll 18s in every stat, you are just as crunchy to the monsters as the rest of the party. You can pick up a copy of the game at your local game store. I think the current version goes for about $50, and it is a hefty beast. The classic modules, including Mask of Nyarlathotep, are still in print, so you can order them. You can get the older stuff, at least the not too older stuff, on eBay for not much. So there is no reason why you and your friends cannot get together and play unless you're just afraid of, getting eaten by Amigo. So that'll wrap up Call of Cthulhu. I'm going to stick with the highly lethal role-playing game binge I've been on lately and talk about next time Twilight 2000, the World War III nuclear holocaust game designed by Games Designer Workshop, which fortunately never came to pass. And it's a little dated because it's set in the year 2000, so you're using 90s military technology. But if you're a military buff or you like survival games, this one is really good, even though it has the reputation of just being a total meat grinder. If you wanted to ever play a role-playing game where dying of cholera, dysentery, or rabies is a strong possibility, Twilight 2000 is your game. So until next time, adios amigos.